at it with each other. This guy loses because he's the underweight, he's the featherweight compared to the 800-pound gorilla that attacked him. They were solitary animals for one thing, and maybe just being in proximity to another animal was enough to enable some aggressive activity. We do know, however, that mosasaurs fought with each other fairly consistently. Lots of mosasaur remains have got broken bones or healed bite marks. It's very evident from the fossil record that these things did not live together harmoniously. They tended to fight each other a lot.
So to pry open a door onto the past, a paleontologist must be part forensic pathologist.
We can see bite marks, or we can see the teeth of other animals, or evidence of digestion, or pathologies that may include things like cancer or even arthritis in some animals. Those are important bits of information that tell us more about these creatures and how they lived.
But just what exactly was going on inside a mosasaur's gigantic head?
Brain size is small. Even the largest mosasaurs, the brain was not much larger than, say, your index finger. A lot of the responses, a lot of the activity of a mosasaur was purely instinctive. They didn't sit around thinking about the condition of the world or anything. They were active predators, and that's what they did.
The mosasaurs dominated the seas before becoming extinct 65 million years ago. But mosasaurs might not seem quite as bizarre as giant insects, like this dragonfly that grew to the size of a hawk and hunted the skies of the Carboniferous period 300 million years ago. We go through a great deal of effort to control our environments and to make them comfortable, inside and out. But there are few things that destroy our peace of mind like insects. And yet, they're everywhere, above us, beneath our feet, and in our food. But it could be worse, much worse. They could be giants. Is this just fantasy, paranoid 1950s style science fiction? Maybe so, but for a period in Earth's distant history, giant insects were a fact of life.
Imagine a huge dragonfly with a wingspan of about 3 feet.
This dragonfly, Meganeura, was one of the most aggressive predators 300 million years ago.
Paleontologists now find mostly wings as fossils because those are the sturdiest parts of the body that usually survive fossilization. So for all the giants, there are only some body parts found, and the paleontologists have to puzzle the pieces together and guess the actual size of the animal from scaling relationships of living animals or complete fossils that they found from other times.
During the Carboniferous period, many parts of the Earth were a swampy smorgasbord for this oversized insect.
The environment was pretty warm, and it was a time where a lot of plants started to grow. The first forest existed. The world was very humid and moist, so it was a time where there was a lot of abundance of new habitats and abundance of food and shelter.
Meganeura buzzed overhead, preying on insects and even small amphibians that it snatched up with its legs. On the ground below, Arthropleura, a 6-foot giant millipede-like creature, skittered through the swamps on 30 pairs of legs. The largest land arthropod may have eaten as much as 1 ton of vegetation a year. There was no predator on land that was big enough or strong enough to break through its hard exoskeleton.
We call it a sow bug on steroids. It's not an insect, but it's related to parts of arthropods. It includes the crustaceans and the millipedes. So it would have reminded you of a centipede or a sow bug, but it's gigantic, 8, 9 feet long in some specimens.
There weren't many predators around on the land during the Carboniferous, so it was a very good time to be an invertebrate.
It's certainly the largest land animal alive at that time, And any kind of either plant or animal debris that it wanted to eat, it could eat, but it doesn't need to be a great predator at a time when there's so much food available. The world was ruled by arthropods still. Even the cockroaches are huge, they were a foot long.
Scientists suspected that plentiful food and relative safety were not enough to make superbugs possible. If that were all it took, they might still be around today. But there was another significant environmental difference during the Carboniferous period.
Plant life was doing so well in the Carboniferous, pumping lots of oxygen into the atmosphere. Part of it may also be that a lot of these forests were growing in wet, swampy environments, and when that plant material is then preserved in those environments, you're sequestering carbon in those environments. So if you're taking out carbon from the atmosphere, you're changing the ratio between oxygen and carbon in the atmosphere.
Researchers suspected that higher oxygen levels during the Carboniferous period were key to insect growth, but they didn't understand the connection. The secret to this mystery is under investigation just outside of Chicago, Illinois, at the Argonne National Laboratory, one of the U.S. Department of Energy's largest research centers. Scientists here suspect that the key to size has to do with how insects supply their bodies with oxygen, and are looking for answers about insect respiration in this tiny beetle's body.
The first thing that I do is to take the beetle and knock him out. I simply put him to sleep by giving him nitrogen gas. This is just temporary. It doesn't hurt the animal at all.
Once the beetle has been properly subdued, he's ready for his close-up.
What I'm doing here is placing the beetle on a stand that we can control from the outside. So we can move it up and down and side to side and position where we want it in the X-ray beam.
Searching station C. Exit immediately.
This tiny bug sits at the imaging end of one of the world's most massive X-ray machines.
This is the advanced photon source. It is what we call a third-generation synchrotron. This function is to produce very powerful X-rays.
The synchrotron generates X-rays 1 billion times stronger than a hospital X-ray machine by accelerating electrons around a 1.1 kilometer track at close to the speed of light and harnessing the X-rays they emit. Teams of researchers work at stations around the track, accessing the 2 millimeter square laser-like X-rays for their experiments.
What's the species again?
This is Tenebrio molitor. It's a mealworm beetle.
Because of the strength of these X-rays, our team can see the beetle's respiratory system in action to understand how it works and how this system limits insect size.
The analogy here is before we had X-rays in general, we knew that there was anatomy, and we knew there, you had bones and muscles, but it'd be like only being able to dissect a dead human to going to being able to see the muscle movement and the bone movement all at once. That's how big of a leap this is for small animals like this.
And the tracheal tubes, the key to insect breathing, turn out to be critical to insect size. Unlike vertebrates, who get oxygen from their lungs to their cells in their bloodstream, insects transport oxygen through a series of tracheal tubes that runs from the surface of their exoskeletons out to their extremities where they dead end.
And one of the trachea here is actually pumping. So you can see that the band is contracting and expanding.
This tracheal system is incredibly efficient at delivering oxygen, but with the help of the detailed X-rays, researchers were able to shed light on the limitations of this breathing design.
With the high-resolution X-rays, we can measure their anatomy and measure their details with precision that we've never done before.
What researchers learned from their measurements of the trachea of tiny beetles and specimens as much as 1,000 times larger is that as you scale up in bug size, the trachea must grow disproportionately larger to maintain oxygen supplies. Insects' bodies place an upper limit on this growth.
There's a very unique feature in insects, and this is that they have an exoskeleton. So they have a hard shell that confines the space for tissue inside of the body. So what they have to do is they have to pack all the tissue, all the things that they need to survive within this confined area that they have. And there are few places in the body where this confinement is actually very important.
The critical junctures in insects occur at their joints, areas where their exoskeletons pinch and they end up with traffic jams of trachea and tissue.
It's right here where the leg is attached to the body. Through this orifice, insects have to supply the air. They have to connect muscles by tendons. They have to supply insect blood through that orifice into the leg.
As beetles get bigger, the tracheal tubes begin to fill up the space in this orifice. A little math led researchers to a prediction of maximum bug size.
When we increase the tracheal dimensions to a point where about 90% of this orifice is covered by a tracheal tube, the hypothetical beetle is about 16, 17 centimeters large. And this is about the size of the largest beetle that we have on Earth nowadays. It's a longhorn beetle. It's called Titanus, and it's a Central American animal.
In our environment, bugs can get no bigger. But what if you had an environment 300 million years ago when oxygen levels were markedly higher? Oxygen levels in the Carboniferous atmosphere increased over time until they reached levels of between 30 and 35%, as opposed to today's 20% atmospheric oxygen concentrations.
Because we had a better oxygen supply into those structures, insects could actually decrease the size and the dimensions of those tracheal tubes.
Smaller tracheal tubes left more space for other tissues to grow.
They essentially were superfueled arthropods during the Carboniferous with this enhanced level of oxygen.
These theories are currently being put to the test.
What my colleagues are doing at Arizona State University is rearing flies or other insects under different oxygen concentrations and see if they actually change their size or their tracheal dimensions. For example, fruit flies under higher and lower oxygen concentrations. And what they saw is that, yes, they get bigger as oxygen supply is higher, and they also reduce their tracheal dimensions.
The giant insects and arthropods, like most eccentric life forms on the planet, were a passing phenomenon. But their creeping, crawling insect descendants are still with us and comprise roughly 95% of life on land. Birds are also still with us, and the connection between feathers and flight has long been understood. But new revelations in the fossil record are shaking up what we know about the evolution of feathers and which past monsters wore a downy coat.
Timmy, what is it? It's a velociraptor.
Raptors. They've been immortalized on screen as extra-large, cunning super predators.
It's certainly an animal that would have been a formidable predator and not an animal you would want to run into in a back alley.
Moreover, raptors look like something terrifying sent over from central casting. Swift, stealthy, with sickle-shaped claws on their back feet, powerful arms, and that chilling reptilian look. But the truth is often stranger and more complex than fiction. Most raptors were relatively small, and recent evidence indicates these dromaeosaurs, or swift reptiles, were actually related to birds and were covered in feathers.
It is a shock. You go from these scaly reptiles to what might, in an instance like Velociraptor, be this really angry chicken.
The angry chicken. It just doesn't have that marquee ring to it, but it does have the ring of truth, because feathers first appeared on dinosaurs. As birds evolved from dinosaurs, feathers became more substantial in order to be useful for flight.
There are very few differences that you could point to between, say, a chicken and a T-Rex. They have very, very similar anatomies, and that's because they have a common ancestor, and that common ancestor is not very far back in their lineage.